Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, Dr. Alok Patel will be here to answer your questions about COVID-19, including whether a new variant is serious enough to warrant its own Greek letter. But first, a 26-year-old Bay Area cold case murder solved with new DNA technology by investigators who refuse to give up.
The family was obviously relieved, and it's just a prime example of how, we don't forget about the victims. Every family deserves answers, and this is a way of us doing it.
This week, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office announced they've finally identified who killed the 32-year-old Union City woman and mother of 3 girls back in 1996. Michelle Marie Veal's nude body was found on the side of the road in Sonoma County, one of many female deaths spanning 1970s, 80s, and 90s in the era of hitchhiking. Today, we're joined by award-winning investigative journalist Grace Kahng, and in their first TV interviews on the stunning news, the 2 Sonoma County Sheriff's violent crimes investigators central to the Veal case, Detective Adrian Anaya, who solved the mystery, and Detective John Barr, who heads up the cold cases unit. Thank you all for being here. Grace, some of us are old enough to remember the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders that terrorized women in Sonoma County back in the 70s. I know Michelle Veal's case came later, but certainly made headlines. Who was Michelle Veal?
Michelle was a vibrant, magnetic, her oldest daughter told me she was this magnetic, incredibly popular local Union City woman who was a loving mother of 3 beautiful girls aged 10 and 7, 8 and 7. And she was beloved and raised in a lovely, warming Bay Area family. And her disappearance and her horrible, brutal murder has scarred all of them for life.
Detective Anaya, can you give us some details on the crime, how she met up with, we saw the picture of Jack Bokin, who you've now identified, and we'll go into how that was done later, but how does she meet up with him, and tell us about the scene?
On the bigger scale, this is similar to a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Over time, you try to put a puzzle together, and in the end, there's a good chance you're going to be left with pieces you don't know, and that comes to play here, where in the end we don't know exactly how they came to come in contact. We just know that unfortunately Michelle came across this character.
Yeah, but the body, what you were able to tell, the way she fought, there was DNA evidence. So talk to us about what kind of DNA evidence was left, how you came to discover it, and then how you ultimately used it to link her to Jack Bokin.
Sure. By the courage of Michelle, she gave us clues to help solve her murder and tell her story. I began reviewing this cold case file, early last year, and my goal was to really, I think it was logical to attack the evidence and see what viable evidence we still had that could be used to solve the case with current technology regarding DNA. There was good evidence. I seen this case. There was a great detail of collecting and retaining evidence for this case, and fortunately, I was able to submit case evidence to a private lab.
All right. A little bit more about this DNA technology, right? It's relatively new, and I think, weren't you down to your last scrap of evidence?
Yeah, it came down to case evidence where the analyst at Siri let me know, hey, this is going to exhaust some evidence. And talking it over with my fellow detectives in the office, we determined, it's coming up on 25, 26 years. Now's the time that we try to tell this story and solve this case.
Detective, who was Jack Bokin? The thing is, he died in prison last year. Talk to us about what he was in prison for, what he had been convicted of.
He did die in prison roughly a month or so before we got this DNA hit. He was imprisoned roughly October of 1997 for a series of horrendous violent sexual acts that occurred within the San Francisco area.
Okay. You had to tell both families about this discovery. It was very difficult because Veal was the mother of 3 young girls when she was killed. They are, of course, now middle-aged women. I think we have some pictures. What was their reaction when you told them that after all this time, 26 years, you can now tell them who their mother's killer was?
You know, I would really, to really get to grasp that, I could only empathize for the tragedy in their family. And I did meet with the mother, Tilly, the sister, Cindy, and also her daughters, Brittany, Melissa, and Corinne. I can only empathize and assume that there's great sorrow, but what I shared with them is that at least we can provide you with answers to what happened to your mother, your family member. You know, I would imagine a mixed amount of emotions.
What about Bokin's family? I assume you also had to talk to them. What was their reaction?
We did, and in this case, I've come across a lot of different situations for the first time, and that's one of them. It's a very unusual conversation, but you know, once again, I think I can only imagine what they went through at that time. This guy was a horrific character. He held a family, but yet committed these horrendous crimes. So you could imagine that the confusion and all the emotions that they must have felt.
Talk to us a little bit about Bokin. You said he had a family. You know, Detective Barr, I think you look at the profile of serial killers very closely. He was not atypical, was he? Talk to us about how he grew up. You know, he seems smart and accomplished. Who was he?
Well, when we look at his background, which we did once we got the hit, we started diving into his background and looking at how his criminal history, and we noticed that it went back to the 60s when he was a young man. And then we started digging in and talking to family members and learning some things. And it is not atypical. His background is similar to other backgrounds that we've are investigating currently on some of the other cases that we have on persons of interest.
In fact, you know, the hitchhiker killings, I think most of them, you know, so many women. How many were there and how many still unsolved?
Well, the hitchhiker killings, you know, over the years, tons of detectives throughout our agency and agencies in Northern California have looked at them, and it goes even beyond that. But I think in ours, we have several that are unsolved, similar. You know, young ladies were known to be hitchhiking and were their deceased bodies were found in rural locations around Sonoma County. And throughout the years, detectives have continued to investigate, you know, persons of interest, but we haven't identified a subject.
So now
when Bokin came up, oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. My apologies. I am wondering, though, since Bokin has now been tied to Michelle Veal, does this mean he is now going to be matched with some of the evidence you may have remaining for some of those other victims whose cases are unsolved, whose families still have no answer and no closure?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to look at it, you know, just based on Adrian's investigation and now kind of going back on Bokin's history. Now that he's come up, we're going to, you know, he was in the proximity of Sonoma County during those times. So he's definitely somebody we'll look at and investigate.
Grace, what can you tell us? Because I know you've spent so much time looking into these cases. It's really been a driving passion for you to bring justice to them. Talk about the significance of this case solved 26 years later and what that might do for the others.
So I think that what's important to understand here is there was an epidemic of killing in Northern California. Michelle Veal is one case that Sonoma has. They have 66 unsolved cold cases, and they are all young women. The beginning of the hitchhiker cases began on February 4th, 1972, with two middle school girls. Imagine that in present day, if a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old were walking away from a roller rink and they just vanished. And then 9 months later, 3 days after Christmas in 1972, their naked, nude bodies, just like Michelle Veal, was found just dumped like garbage, stripped of all of their clothing, and left on an embankment not that far from where Michelle Veal's body was. And for me, the question is, look, these cases are decades old, and the work that Sonoma County is doing is critical because, as you can see, Adrian was describing, Jack Bokin was not just a San Francisco serial rapist. He held these women in the basement of homes while his family was at home. And was striking these women on the back of the head with a hammer. The case that actually sent Jack Bokin to prison with a 231-year sentence was because after he had sexually assaulted and brutalized, I mean, he bit them so hard they thought their tongues were going to come off. After he brutalized these young women, there was one 19-year-old woman that he picked up who was a single mother of a 2-year-old. And she fought so hard, he beat her over the head with a hammer. He put a plastic bag on her head. She played dead. She wiped her blood on the inside of the trunk of Bokin's car. She had the presence of mind to do that. And he dumped her in the bay off of the Embarcadero near the ferry building. And she swam to shore, somehow untied herself and got to safety. And it was based on that, on Amber's bravery and survival, that they were able to finally put him to jail. So what we know now is that guy, Jack Bokin, who, like many of the serial killers and sociopaths that we investigate, he lived a double life. He wanted to be an astrophysicist. He was a graduate of Lowell High School. He was incredibly smart. And a detective that I just talked to, who retired from San Francisco, said he was strong as a bull and he was smart as hell. And he was incredibly deviant. And those three things made him a dangerous predator.
All right, we have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk more about both Michelle Veal's case, but also breaking news, because we understand you've also made a connection to a Stanford murder. That too terrorized women decades ago, and we'll be right back with more. All right, thank you all for joining us. We are right now in a commercial break and on Facebook Live. Folks, thanks for watching. We'll be back in a couple minutes to continue this conversation.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, welcome back. We are talking about the breaking news this week. A 26-year-old cold case killing solved in Sonoma County. So back with the detectives and the investigative journalists who helped solve the case. Grace, also, breaking news, your work has also revealed a stunning new bombshell with regard to John Gertrude, the Stanford killer who's now in prison. Talk to us about that.
First of all, I didn't work on the Michelle Veal case. That was all Sonoma County, so I want to give the props to them. But I have been working collaboratively on other cases, and it was actually John Gertrude, the guy who killed Stanford's football coach's youngest daughter and Stanford's standout Leslie Paraloff. It was following him that led me up to Sonoma County because, you know, the thing about these predators that you learn about Bokin and John Gertrude and the rest of them is, and the Golden State Killer, they have a long career of killing. They get up every day like the rest of us get up every day to do a job, and they are killing, which is why you see so many of these cold cases now revealing, you know, otherwise what would be elderly grandfathers, you know, living normal lives who, you know, decades ago were predators hunting women. Wait, sorry, Kristen, what's your question? Oh, about the revelation?
Yes. You found a new 15-year-old victim?
Yes. So John Gertrude, I have no doubt, we are following other cases in Sonoma, Marin that he did, and in Ohio since 1980. This poor couple has had zero answers about their 15-year-old daughter, Teresa Smith. Teresa Smith was like any other, you know, middle school girl. She was on the pep team, and she disappeared off of Main Street in Newark, Ohio, and was never seen for 8 days. And what happens a lot of times is, you know, if you read the investigative files about Teresa's case, when her body turned up, you know, 7 days later, like 3 counties away, there was all kinds of rumor and speculation that she was hanging out with the wrong crowd. That was completely incorrect. Her parents told me she always came home for dinner. And yes, she did have a boyfriend at 15. And yes, they did give her birth control because that was like the responsible thing to do. But they used those things against her and basically said that her death was unexplained and that she ran with the crowd. But it turns out that 2 blocks from her house, guess who lived there? John Gertrude.
All right, well, we can't wait to hear more about that, but I want to, before we go, I got to ask you, and I guess this is for Detective Barr, which is, if you can solve a case like Veal's 26 years later, I assume there's more evidence in other cases that are unsolved that are just sitting in boxes in police departments everywhere across the country. What do you think needs to happen so that more families can get closure?
Well, you know, obviously these cases are hard because they've been sitting around there, and like our unit, we all carry a caseload with current cases. So to work these cases, it's almost, you know, you got to put in extra time. And I think that, you know, budgetary reasons, you know, there's a lot of stuff that comes into play. But once you get into them, there's no, you can't help but work them because you almost feel like, you know, when you get something like Adrian said about the family, the closure to the Veal family, the reward at the end, what kind of keeps driving you to keep doing it. And we have, you know, constantly get ex-detectives, retired detectives that come into our office that ask about these cases because they're still thinking about them every day.
Wow.
So you know, unfortunately, it comes down to manpower and money, just like everything else. And, you know, hopefully.
There is a very, very grateful family out there for your tenacity and hard work. And for folks who want to find out more information, including if you have tips, because the public is part of this as well, right? You can send them in to hitchhikerkiller.com. Again, that's hitchhikerkiller.com. Grace Kahng, Detectives Anaya and Barr, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we'll be right back with Dr. Alok Patel to look at the latest COVID headlines. Be right back.
In commercial break.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll take a short break and be back with Dr. Alok Patel. Good news, bad news today regarding COVID-19. A new model shows nearly 3/4 of Americans may now be immune to Omicron. But new lab experiments suggest the BA.2 subvariant of Omicron may be worse and perhaps worthy of its own Greek letter. Joining us now to talk more about that and more, and ABC 7 News special correspondent Dr. Alok Patel. Dr. Patel, our time is short and we have so much to cover, so I know you got two truths and a lie ready for us to go.
Kristen, I'm just gonna have to come with it. Everyone knows how this game works.
That's right.
You all know that Kristen is a pro at this. Excuse me. To tell us which one of these is not true.
All right, Facebook friends, let's go.
Let's rock and roll. Is it A, Governor Newsom's SMARTER plan stands for shots, masks, awareness, readiness, tracing, education, and RX or prescriptions? Or is it B, a report of patients recovered from COVID showed an increase in both mental illness and heart disease? Or is it C, San Francisco officials will revisit the school mask mandate on February 28th. These are all important, but one of these is slightly not true. Which one is it?
Oh, I think I know this one, but I'm going to give our viewers a few seconds just to see if they know it. All right, come on. Come on, first three viewers on Facebook Live who are watching and answer this. Okay, Robert says B is the lie. All right, let's see if we get any more. I will actually, Sally's going with A. Anyone for C? Dr. Patel, you certainly got tricky. Erica also weighs in with A. You know what? Just because our time is short, I am going to join the folks saying A because I think tracing is not the T word, it is testing.
Ding, 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 correct. Testing is part of the SMARTER plan, and I'll be quick. B was a study of over 150,000 patients in the Veterans Affairs electronic system, and all it does is adds to the information we know about long COVID, because a lot of these patients suffered from increased anxiety, depression, sleep issues, substance abuse, and more. So it's definitely something we have to take into account. And C, a lot of parents are waiting to see what's going to happen at the end of February when California revisits the school mask mandate. But remember, as always, Kristen, as we talk about, lifting a mask mandate does not necessarily mean that local districts and local businesses have to follow that. And as always, when in doubt, you should still wear a mask.
All right. And as you mentioned, on February 28th, they will be making that announcement to see what they're going to do about the mask requirement. They're hoping the numbers will be good, right? So, Dr. Patel, do you see signs that they will be good and, will be able to allow lifting sooner rather than later?
I do, Kristen. I do see that, the trajectory we're going in right now with cases on the decline and hospitalizations going down, it does look like we should be revisiting these mask mandates a little later on. But I think it's going to be tricky, especially now that we know that those vaccines for kids under the age of 5 are going to be delayed. So that primary prevention is not going to be around right now. So I don't see this being uniform across the state. I see it being done in a more staggered fashion.
Okay, so masks are being lifted, and I think a lot of people understand, going optional there is maybe an okay strategy. But we're also seeing a lot of places lifting their vaccine mandate, right? Massive concerts, restaurants that are not requiring vaccines anymore. I wonder what you think about that and whether that may be a disincentive for new vaccinations, which of course we still want.
Kristen, in this setting where we're lifting both the mask mandate and proof of vaccines, and anyone who was incentivized to get a shot because they wanted to get back to their normal life, that incentive is gone. So I agree with you. I think that does remove some of the motivation, but I'm going to be completely honest. I think at this point, we've reached a critical number of people who are going to get a vaccine based on the information at hand. I'm not very optimistic that we're going to see a lot more people get their boosters, although I will obviously push it. I don't understand the lifting of both mask mandates and proof of vaccine right now when cases are still high. I think that needs to be done a little bit later.
Just another thing to not understand during this pandemic. But, you were talking about the vaccinations, and this is related. A new study shows about 73% of Americans may now be immune to Omicron. That's what the model says. So I ask you, what does that mean if true, right? Does that mean we won't have any more surges, or maybe we still will, but maybe not as many hospitalizations or illnesses? What do you think?
Well, I hope it definitely leads to the latter, that we have a little bit more community immunity. Now, Kristen, the key word you said is may, because what this model is actually looking at is a little bit over 200 million Americans who are fully vaccinated. Of that, about 40% have been boosted. And then, according to the CDC, about 80 million infections have been documented in the United States, and probably a lot more that have not been documented. So when you add it all together, there is some level of strong vaccine and naturally acquired immunity out there. So hopefully that creates a little bit more of a cushion as we see more outbreaks and less widespread. But hey, a new variant could obviously upset all of this, and anyone out there who doesn't still have a form of protection is still at risk.
Speaking of new variant, I'm hearing new lab experiments out of Japan suggest the BA.2 variant is something to worry about and perhaps might be getting a new Greek letter of its own.
It could. Now, I don't think people need to jump and get freaked out just yet because this is a preprint study, meaning it has not been reviewed by an independent group of experts, and it was done in animals, hamsters, and mice. But Kristen, what this did show is that in this controlled setting, BA.2, the subvariant of Omicron, it looked to be able to bind a little bit more stronger to some of the cells that cause infection, possibly able to evade the antibodies we know that can actually target Omicron, and potentially could cause more severe illness. But again, this is very early. We're still trying to watch to see what happens. It's a minority of cases in the United States. And what's really interesting is it where it's popular in South Africa and UK, hospitalizations are going down, but they're going up in Denmark, where it also is.
Dr. Patel, thank you very much. Let's continue to chat on Facebook Live. We'll be right back.
Right on.
All right, so Dr. Patel, this is where you answer our viewers' questions. That way they don't have to like go see their doctor and pay that copay or like, you know, wait for a call
Whoa,
back.
I can't cover that.
All right, so Kevin says, I have received one J&J shot. Then in November, I got a Moderna booster. I'm overweight and high BP, blood pressure. I feel like I should get another booster. I tried, but RX said I cannot get a second booster. So I feel like I've had less vaccines than most vaccinated people. Your thoughts, Dr. Patel?
Kevin, according to the data we have, you are still well protected. You might be seeing reports out there that the antibody response is waning after a certain amount of time, and that might be true, but against severe illness and or death, you still have great protection. The population we're really looking at in terms of getting an additional booster are people who are immunocompromised. But hey, when in doubt, chat with your doctor. You might have to pay a copay, but it's the safe thing to do.
Okay, yeah, that's right. You don't want to take copays away from other doctors. Mark has a question. What's going to be next? Why is the Santa Clara health officer holding back, thinking that the numbers are not good enough? You know, is there something different about Santa Clara County that you've seen compared to other Bay Area counties? Or is it simply, you know, reasonable people looking at the same numbers but coming to slightly different conclusions?
Kristen, I think that's what it is. And I think that it's fair for certain counties to be more conservative than others with respect to hospital capacity and what community transmission looks like, what local resources look like. And that's just the name of the game. We do not have a one-size-fits-all solution for every single county out there, which is why some of these new mask mandates, immunization requirements, what all is going to change is just going to depend on what things look like locally for you.
All right. So lastly, is there anything you're doing differently now versus a few days ago when we still had the indoor mask mandate?
To be honest, I'm not. When I'm still in a crowded setting around, I'm still keeping a mask with me because I have an unvaccinated and very adorable 10-month-old, and I want to keep her protected.
Okay, that very adorable part is so very true, folks. Thank you, Dr. Patel. Have a great weekend.
Kristen, happy Friday. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. Bye-bye.